At this time, I would like to introduce UCLA's Dean of Humanities and today's keynote speaker, Professor David Schaberg. Dean Schaberg is a scholar of ancient Chinese, Greek, and Latin literature and embodies the interdisciplinary spirit that animates the humanities in the 21st century. Since coming to UCLA in 1996, he has published an award-winning book on early Chinese historiography. He also has numerous articles on early Chinese historical writing, literature, philosophy, oratory, and gossip. Most recently, he has completed a translation with two collaborators of China's first great historical work, the Shoshan. He has served as a co-director of the Center for Chinese Studies and chair of the Department of Asian Languages and Cultures. UCLA's current campaign proclaims, quote, "We are the optimists." And our dean defines this by adding, "We are the people who believe that anything is possible." Dean Schaberg not only defines this, but he's also a walking illustration of this spirit, coupling scholarly excellence with a passion for undergraduate education. As dean, he is pursuing an ambitious program of reshaping the humanities in the 21st century. And most recently, he spearheaded a campaign resulting in a grant of $5 million from the Mellon Foundation to improve undergraduate and graduate pedagogy in the humanities at UCLA and beyond. His excitement and drive communicate themselves to everyone around him so that we can convey to the world what everyone in this hall this afternoon already knows, that students in the humanities will be civic and cultural leaders as we move forward in this century, and that UCLA is situated at the forefront of developments in the humanities worldwide. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to ask you to join me in welcoming Dean David Schaberg.
Thank you very much, Professor Nelson, for that generous introduction. For those of you who were present at yesterday's college commencement ceremony, you know that every year we get into a kind of enjoyable contention among the different divisions of the college. We like to josh with the physical scientists and the life scientists and the social scientists. And it's all in good fun. We're all convinced, of course, that UCLA is a university where you learn some of all these things. What I want to focus on today is what you're going out into the world with as BA recipients in humanities. Now, you should know UCLA as a community, a kind of comprehensive community of teaching and learning. It's a place where, besides the faculty, who are obviously involved in the art of teaching, staff members, all of them, are involved in one way or another in teaching the people who come here for their degrees. And you'll notice, too, that much of your learning has gone on in conjunction with other students. That is, you've been teachers to each other in various ways, just by your presence and also by the active ways that you've intervened with each other. In a lot of ways, you have taught each other how to make a particular kind of community. And it's no accident that in the United States and elsewhere around the world, we regard universities as microcosms of a kind of ideal society. We have higher expectations for the way we treat each other on campus. We hold ourselves to very high values. Here, we look carefully at things like choices of commencement speakers, choices of investments. Universities are places where, as we make the transition from high school students to adults in society, we learn something about what can be done when you work with really diverse, really smart groups of people. So I want to focus a little bit today on what it is that you're going out into the world with. You came here as learners, elite learners. Everyone understands how difficult it is to become a Bruin. All of you worked hard in your high school years to get to UCLA in the first place, and have worked very hard as learners during these years to get to this place today. And during that time, you've become multifaceted learners, people who are capable of learning in lots of different settings. You've also become inventors of new forms of learning. You leave here as highly skilled learners. And I would argue that in some ways, whereas we may have counterparts elsewhere in the university who are learning technical things, the specialty that you go out with is that specialty in learning, that expertise in finding the question that matters, in finding the ways to address it, to do the research around it, in finding the ways to express your findings, and finding ways to persuade others of what you've discovered in your learning. Your learning machines, if I can put it that way, but of course I mean your learning human beings. And your true learners. And I mean something a little deeper than just having the techniques that you need to pick up a new language or to pick up a new area of scholarship. I take the true learner to be the person who is able at the right moment to sit back and listen. And to listen to till that other person has finished expressing himself or herself. And to listen with a high degree of attentiveness. It's a daunting thing to be listened to that way, to be listened to with full attention. And it brings out in the speaker a kind of responsibility that he or she might not feel otherwise. Be genuine learners. Be true listeners. After all, if you're going to be people who can respond critically to the things you're hearing, you're going to need to understand the positions on the other side of the argument extremely well. You are listeners. You are true learners in that sense. Of course, that kind of learning also brings a high degree of discernment and critique to it. Whether you've been in a philosophy classroom, as I know many of you have been, or other sorts of classrooms here in the humanities, you have already picked up, both consciously and unconsciously, the best arts of discernment and critique and response. And when you pair those with being the great listeners that I think you are, you become extremely powerful participants in any possible conversation, whether between two people or a conversation that extends society-wide. Confucius is supposed to have said that in any group of three people he finds himself in, he'll find a teacher for himself. On the one hand, because he can pick out the good points of another person and imitate them. On the other hand, because he may be able to pick out some of the failings in another person and correct them in himself. That's who I want you to be. I want you to be tireless learners, as Confucius himself is supposed to have been. His students said, "We can imitate you in anything, Confucius, but we can't imitate you in your love of learning." Cultivate that. It's the greatest form of power. As you leave UCLA, though, and step out into a world that is not a microcosm, but the real thing, and a world where the divisions among people can be considerably more brutal than the kinds of divisions we find on campus, you're going to be called to be teachers as well. And there's a natural continuity between the learner and the teacher. Because you know how to learn, and because you have devoted these years to learning some of the deepest values that our ancestors have held, that our counterparts around the world have held, you're singularly well positioned to listen with a high degree of expertise, and then to teach. And that's what I'm hoping from you in the coming years. As teachers, you are, of course, exposed already through these years at university to the kinds of values that have mattered generation after generation, the kinds of values that we tend to count on at moments of greatest stress, whether, again, in private settings or in public settings, the values that we know we can hold to. Because you've spent these years as undergraduates in the humanities here, you have a high degree of self-awareness, the ability to critique yourselves. I had a conversation with my younger son recently in which he was pointing out how irritated he was feeling. He was feeling frustrated with his friends and frustrated with himself in kind of corresponding ways. And what became clear as we talked is that his own skills as a self-critic, as someone who's constantly examining his own work, his own motivations, and those of his friends, that these self-critical skills were maturing, and he was going to have to learn how to manage that habit of self-critique. Embrace it. Be your own best, strongest critics, because that is the thing that will move you forward. Don't be afraid to critique yourself, but don't fall for the trap of critiquing yourself in a devastating way. Understand that self-critique is part of what will power you forward to the top. I want you to learn to be honest. And I mean honest about yourselves with yourselves, honest about yourselves with others. Again, this is something that comes more easily when you've spent the kind of time with humanistic materials that you've spent. You're used to grappling with difficult problems. You're used to pushing beyond a seeming solution and finding a solution that is more satisfying as a lasting answer and that will actually convince more people. You're building communities of shared interpretation because you're able to examine things on a deep level. And I encourage you, when you leave this building, to take a look at the quote over the eastern front door of the building. It nicely encapsulates some of the things that you've learned as humanities undergraduates. To pick up a word that our excellent commencement speaker from yesterday, Anita Ortega, used, be relentless. Don't miss the lesson that she taught us in her speech to us yesterday. She spoke of coming from South Central to UCLA, of walking on the basketball court and leading that team to a championship in 1978. She spoke of becoming an officer in the LA Police Department and rising from the bottom as a woman of color to the position of area commander. At every point, she identified and accepted the challenge, and she took her satisfaction in challenging herself at every turn. You know how to identify those challenges. You know how to identify the challenges that matter. And those are challenges that you're well equipped to face as you go forward. I think that your training here and the kind of breadth of thought that you've been exposed to put you in a position of stronger creativity than you might be able to count on if you had devoted yourself to other fields. Why? Because you do see the lasting values that inform human endeavor. You do see that in order to be a successful technology, a technology must also take account of the human values that we bring when we use a technology, of the differences among people that we find as we look across nations and languages and cultures and ethnicities and races. You're in a position to be interpreters, and that means that you're in a position to provide more creative solutions to problems than others might find, including the people with the more technical skills. You're needed now more than ever to keep human what must be kept human in our lives. I think that all of these things also give you an access to freedom. Freedom will only come with self-awareness, with a real sense of what you're capable of achieving, and with a real sense of what you want to achieve. You'll control your destiny by deciding which way you're going and why. And the training you've had here prepares you uniquely well for that project, which is a year-to-year, minute-to-minute, second-to-second project. How to become what you care to become. There would be a nice classical way of making this point. It would be a Chinese philosopher who always spoke about how we should imagine ourselves as a kind of uncarved block. Right? The uncarved block is the thing that hasn't yet been made into a particular implement. It's just there, full of infinite potential, and then you can carve it and make it into a cup or whatever. It's a kind of fancy way to put it, and there's a good point there, but I'd prefer, for your sake, to put it with a slightly different analogy, and that would be the magic pocket of Doraemon. I don't know if people are fans of that manga character and that anime character, but he had a magic pocket from which, at a critical moment in the plot of the cartoon, he could pull out whatever tool he needed. Think of your training that way. You've been given all kinds of tools. Tools of cultural literacy, tools of expression, tools of understanding, tools of listening, as I was saying, tools of persuasion, writing, tools of imagination above all. And I want you to have some serious confidence in that. In fact, in closing, confidence is my theme. Never allow those pundits out there who say dismissive things about the humanities to turn your head. They shouldn't. You've prepared yourselves with the most versatile and most adaptable tools. In a job market where many of you will switch jobs frequently as you see new opportunities open, these skills are the ones that will stay with you and that will ensure that you always have something to offer to the new people you're working with and the new settings you're working in. I want you to be confident in your own strength, your UCLA graduates, your Bruins. I want you to be confident in the strength of your larger Bruin family, both the one that's sitting here and that larger family of 500,000 UCLA graduates out there in the world. And above all, I want you to be confident in your ability to enunciate human values, the things that matter and the things that must be reasserted at times of rapid change, right? You are the generation leaving UCLA now and going out into the world. You're Bruins, and we need to be able to count on you to carry forward the strongest traditions and to continue asking and answering the big questions that you've been working with throughout your undergraduate career. I'm very proud of you. The faculty are extremely proud of you. I congratulate you on behalf of all of the faculty members and everyone who's at UCLA. And I have the highest hopes for your future as learners and as teachers in the world. Congratulations, Bruins, and please keep in touch. We need you.